time sign out, or everyone's good to go in that regard. Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, anyone, if you haven't signed in, I can get you the sign-in sheet. I think it's just 2 new folks.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I'll pass that back to Jerry as well.
Thank you. What is the NPN?
What's that?
The NPN?
License number?
That'd be your license number, which you can give it to me later.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you, brother.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
And if you don't have your like real estate license number,
I have it.
okay, perfect, man. Thanks.
Ready to rock, sir?
Ready to get it. Let's go. All right.
With Amanda.
I think that'd be a pretty fun job, assuming you have the right kids there.
Yeah, I went through a couple of groups of kids, a couple of families. It is, but it gets so hard when it's time to during those areas, you spend more waking hours with the kids than their own parents.
Thank you so much.
Such a connection. And then it's very sudden. Okay, well.
All right, I think we're good. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I think most of y'all were here this morning, so just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to, come and learn something. The purpose of this afternoon's class is the water effects on a property, or water damage on a property. And so in order to do that, we're gonna do something pretty fun and just flood a portion of the space here shortly, and just show you a lot of our equipment in action, and give you a much greater perspective on what your clients deal with when they're dealing with a water damage claim, as far as like, the sounds things make, or just what the whole process looks like, and some of the equipment that we use as well. But yeah. So I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with water damage. It can happen quickly. It can do a lot of damage in a quick time period. And if not treated properly or not taken care of well, it can cause much longer term health effects and damage to a property. So there's definitely, a lot of benefit in just choosing a company that knows what they're doing, that knows that process, very similar to what Seth was talking about. And yeah, I'm sure you're familiar that here in Colorado, we get a lot of freeze breaks, or we get a lot of, potential for frozen pipes. So those things, especially in, mountain homes or in situations where there is no heat, can cause a lot of damage if not taken care of properly. So these are just some pictures to demonstrate, like, kind of how fast damage can occur. And then this is just going back straight to the point that Seth talked about of, is the water damage provider that you use educated and certified? The IICRC is the governing body that writes all the policies that we follow, or the procedures. It basically tells you, if this material is affected by this type of water, are we going to remove it, or can we dry it in place? And we're always gonna do our best to dry and save those materials in place versus just, go in there and start tearing out material. So it's very important that you hire someone that is certified, because they can dry properties out faster, they can avoid secondary damage, and they can save building materials. And I'll explain why that's so important here in just a moment. Let me show you. So an uneducated technician can cause more damage to a home than good. And a few examples of that are like, You know, imagine if someone's cutting into drywall and they don't realize there's electrical wires behind it and cut through an electrical wire or a pipe. You know, they can really start to do a lot more harm than good quickly. They could also cross-contaminate or not put down proper you know, containment and PPE and really spread the problem much further than it ever was to begin with. So it's really important that the technician is knowledgeable and that you're recommending folks that actually abide by the laws here in the state of Colorado as far as asbestos goes. So a lot of people think that asbestos testing revolves around a year or a specific date or something like that. I go into houses all the time where someone's like, oh, that's like 1978 or 1982 or something, right? We don't have to test after that. That is actually inaccurate. It's actually based on the materials that you're removing. So anytime you're going to be removing drywall, linoleum, vinyl, ceramic tile, grout, anything with mastic glue underneath, those are all things that you're going to have to test first. And that's a Colorado law. That's not something that, you know, that's not something that most contractors take risks with because the penalties are so steep. They start at like $20,000 and quickly go up from there. So the threshold for what you're able to remove is about 3 square feet, and anything beyond that really needs to be tested for those materials. So you want to make sure whoever you're recommending actually does, like, they don't do the testing themselves because that's a conflict of interest, but that they have all their projects tested. That's helping with the health and safety of not only your clients, but also the workers that are working in that environment for years, day in and day out. So it's just really important that we, you know, especially as times change and regulations change, that we actually are following the current regulation and not just something that people think is a standard, even though it's not. And that goes to say why continuing education is so important, and why you guys are here today is to, you know, continue to learn that and see the newest information that's coming out. Because, you know, with as much research goes on today, things change year to year. So, and this is why it's so important to be able to save materials, because imagine you go into a property that looks like this and there's water damage or the potential for water damage, and you're like, if this comes apart, the chances of it being put back together and looking the way that it did to begin with, it's just not the same. So that's why when we go into these environments, it's so important that we look to save as much as possible, because that's someone's home. You know, I'm sure you guys are familiar with how seriously people treat their homes and their properties. So it's just very important that we take the standards that we do into these situations, whether it's a house like this or any other type of property. We're going to take that same standard. So let's get some water going. Mike, can you help me with the hose? Would anyone like to help us flood this fine space here? Anyone want to help use the hose? Yeah, so like, I feel like this is your one opportunity where you can actually like cause havoc and there's no repercussions. So definitely take advantage of it. We're just gonna put some water out here for maybe not even 5 minutes or so, 3 or 4 minutes. And then we'll show you the rest of the process from there. Does anyone want to start?
If you don't volunteer, you just get picked.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick someone if you don't volunteer.
I'll flood it. I already got you today. I might as well flood it too.
Cleaning our soot, now you're flooding our...
I know.
Great.
We appreciate it. So,
This feels so wrong.
So, feel free to get the carpet wet, get the hardwood wet, get the baseboards, drywall, everything you can wet. Just try not to get anything over this way wet. Yep.
This feels really wrong. We're watering the grass. We don't do that in Evergreen.
So what the purpose of this is designed for is to really show that not only is the water going to penetrate these areas, but it's also going to fall, collect below and, spread out to the sides. And that's what happens in the event of an actual pipe break or, you know, let's say a hose bib breaks or something like that, and someone's just running their hose outside and that much water is pouring inside, that's just kind of a representation of what you're looking at and how quickly that water can spread. Yeah, and you can step back here and then just get all of this wet, and then, yeah, we'll be good from there.
I don't like this job. I prefer to vacuum.
I can do it.
Okay, good. We're not the right place to do that, but still. Doesn't seem right.
Oh, sorry.
Do it!
Put it in there. Let me spray it.
Thank you.
You got it, girl.
There you go.
See, someone's familiar with the process.
Absolutely. My kids would love this.
You have to go home and do it.
Yeah.
Heck yeah, you're probably good at that, Mike.
Getting the curtains over there. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. We'll dry it all out.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you so much.
See, it doesn't quite
good.
feel right. It's kind of cool, but
Make a mess in somebody else's place, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, you're good, bud. Okay.
pipe breaks anyway.
So the purpose of this is we're going to talk about different categories of water and when we can save materials and when we cannot. So this is what's called category 1 water. We have 3 different types or categories of water that we'll talk about, and I'll go into more depth on those. But anytime we have category 1 water in porous materials, we can save that. And I'll give you a caveat to that because a lot of adjusters are not familiar with being able to save carpet pad. They'll tell us, oh, you can't save the carpet pad, you'll have to pull the pad. Well, we'll show you a piece of equipment that will prevent us from having to pull up pad in a majority of situations with clean water. So let's go over some inspection tools that we use in the field. This is a thermal camera, similar to the ones you'll see in like military applications or things like that, if you've ever, watched those types of videos. But what this does is just gives us a heat signature. So a good representation of this is to like put my hand here and then I get like some body heat on the drywall, and then you can literally see the difference between the temperature of affected material and, in that case, just something I touched, but you get the idea. That would be the affected area and the unaffected area. Anyone want to give this a try or take a look or? Yeah, I mean, it's nothing like crazy, but it's definitely a great visual. What this is really used for is to show like how much area has been affected. So it gives us a good broad viewpoint. Are all the walls and ceilings affected, or is just the floor affected? Or what truly is affected? It helps us see the reach of the water. So that's really for.
Show I sprayed the window.
Yeah.
Some stuff up there.
So this is more or less for a broad view. And this is more or less for just when we're trying to pinpoint damage. This is a moisture meter. And there's 2 different ways that you can use it. You can either use like with these metal tips or metal points. So this can go into drywall, into baseboards, into wood. We tend to try and use the non-aggressive approach or one that won't put any damage to someone's home, which is this contactless one. So anytime we're using this, we would just use it to know for certain if a material is wet or not wet. Examples can even include tile. This can tell if like a wax ring is out on a toilet and that's causing water to seep around that toilet. If there's water underneath wood floor in a kitchen or something like that, this is a really good indicator of where that water is and can really help technicians pinpoint where the water's coming from in the event that they don't know. Let's say the water's, it's a broken drain pipe behind a wall or something like that you can't see. This really comes in handy to help the technicians determine a source if we don't already know one.
That also helps us monitor from day to day how the materials are drying, right? equipment's working
Thank you.
properly.
I see.
Like what percentage of
Right.
Yep. Yeah, so this gives us a scale of 1 to 99% or 99.9 how wet is a material. So to his point, we can go back every 24 hours and monitor and say, oh, okay, we've extracted the water, we've placed drying equipment, and now the materials are sitting at, they were 99 yesterday, now they're 75 today, or now they're 65 today. So it really gives a day-to-day summary to show that it started here as soaking wet, and then we finished here at a dry standard that the material would, does everyone know what I mean by dry standard? So whatever percentage that material would read at if it wasn't affected. So what we typically do is we go to another room that we know is not wet. You'll get a drywall reading. It's like 8 or 12%. That's our goal, is to get it back to that 8 to 12%. This is another tool that we use. It's just a pen meter. Yeah, I don't know why you gave me this, but yeah, it's just a pen meter. Needs a nut or a bolt. So, but yeah.
Just kind of, I go into a house and there's like a little corner that's wet. It'll help me kind of find the perimeter of the water line, and it also helps me show the homeowner kind of where the water is, because a lot of times you walk on the carpet and it's not wet on top because there's a vapor barrier underneath, but the pad is in fact still wet.
Yep. So, and that's also good so that our guys don't have to keep, bending over and stuff like that. They can just kind of know quickly if something's wet or not. So extraction equipment. If you ever hear of a client telling you that a restoration company brought a shop vac or rug doctor or any piece of equipment like that, please never call that restoration company again, or that would be my recommendation, would be to call someone that is using the proper equipment. Those types of pieces of equipment do not get the proper amount of suction to do anything. So, the homeowner would be better off doing the work themselves than having someone, do a poor job at it. It's really important that the company that you're calling out has the latest up-to-date equipment. Oh, yep, thank you, sorry. It would help if I'm showing you the same thing I'm looking at. So the bottom is a shop vac. The top is what we call a truck-mounted extractor, and we'll take you guys outside to look at what a truck-mounted extractor looks like, to start it up and hear what it sounds like. Thank you, I appreciate that. And yeah, we'll do that right now. So if everyone wants to get up, Mike's gonna start it up, and then we're gonna start some extraction in here. Yep.
You guys move it. So we don't fall asleep. What? It looks like my grandma's old fashioned. You know what? My mother-in-law.
Hey, can you pull that through so that I can come back over there? Yep. Thanks.
No, not gonna snow on Friday.
Yeah, I don't know.
It probably will in the mountains.
On Friday.
Michael started up.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Mike start up.
Yep. So we'll start this just in just a moment, but really the reason we bring you out here is just so you know what this sounds like, what it looks like. It is pretty loud, and so if you ever hear a client complain about, they're running a loud piece of equipment, it's because it's the piece of equipment necessary to get the job done. And we can use portable extractors, which is basically a smaller version of this, not as much suction power and doesn't hold as much water. Like, we have a much larger water reservoir in here. And so this really just allows us to be much more efficient with the work and get it done faster. I feel like save the insurance company money in the process, because there's less drying. So it takes 1,000 times more power to dry with the equipment that we'll show you here in a little bit than it takes to dry with this, or to actually just pull that water out, because we're not having to change the water from water to evaporated vapor. So yeah, without further ado, fire up. There's one inside. Yeah. So yeah, that gives you a pretty good idea of what the sound is like. It's like a diesel generator, or like, you know, the sound is pretty on a high decibel level, you know? So yeah, we can head back inside and we'll show you how it works. Hey, it's on the wall there.
No.
That won't work?
No, it doesn't have any ends on it.
Okay. 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 What's that?
Water and electricity, there's no problem there.
We're gonna really get a show today.
Right?
Did I disconnect here earlier?
Stuff towards the dangling in the water.
Yeah. We're gonna put, thank you. Yeah. Great instructing.
Showed all these insurance agents, we just submit a claim.
Right? It's the wrong hose guys. Okay, so the first thing I'll show you guys is what we call our injected dry floor mat drying system. As soon as we get the hose hooked back up, he's attaching more hose. So what this does is it's basically a plastic mat with a seal on the outside, and then with the extraction power that has, it's pulling the water up, not just off the surface of the wood floors, but actually through the cracks of the wood floors. So if anyone wants to come up front here, you can see a lot better the actual suction power that it provides. And basically we have probably 6 or 8 of these mats in differing sizes that can be used for different applications. So you can set them up in like in tandem with one another, or you can just use them one at a time. Anyone want to give this a try? Cool. You just basically, I appreciate it.
All right, guys, gonna keep your heart and work and sucking up, and just having to lift it out.
Yep. So this is how we actually save hardwood floors from getting like crowning or cupping is what it's called, or having to be potentially refinished or completely torn up. A lot of times this process can completely, mitigate that. Yep, thank you. And if you're closer up, you can literally see the water pulling out of the floor, So this is basically something we would set up and have the guys doing their extraction while this is already set up and doing its thing, because it can just sit here in one place and it's going to be pulling a lot of that moisture out of the floor. Everyone see that? So, and this is a newer technology. This device probably came out in the last 5 to 10 years. A lot more accessible here in the last couple of years. So some adjusters won't necessarily be familiar with the process of saving hardwood flooring, but it is definitely 100% possible. Mike, what would you say? Usually like 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 times this is able to save the wood floor when it's able to be saved?
Well, it all depends on the severity of it. If you guys pop a tab and choose the water leak, that's always ideal. Maybe it takes you a day or two if you start pumping and things start doing what it wants to do. It's going to be harder to pull it back to where it needs to get to. But I would say about 50% of the time you're able to save it.
Awesome. So next we're going to show you what's called a next we're going to show you the regular wand extractor. What's that? Oh, yeah. Yes, ma'am. Say that again. Yep. Thanks.
Wand we use on like hard surfaces like concrete, things like that. A lot of carpet cleaners use this wand to get it off your carpet. We'll show you in a little bit, and actually the pads we go through, they take a piece of each pad and they weigh it after we extract it. This wand is not very good for sucking up water out of carpet.
Thank you, brother.
Yep.
Yeah, so the wand it's a good tool. It's a somewhat outdated tool when it comes to carpet, and especially when it comes to getting the water out of the pad. And so then we're gonna move into this is called weighted extraction.
This is a carpet claw. So this is the next thing to come out, the next greatest thing, about 5-10 years ago. Basically, you just stand on it,
And so,
suck the water out, but you have to walk back and forth.
yep. So this is just using the power that you're able to push down with your arms and with your force, whereas that is using our weight to help pull that water out of the pad.
If anybody wants to take a volunteer, please. Volunteer. Actually, book on this one at glass.
What's that?
This one at glass. There's actually like a plexiglass layer. You can actually see the water coming into it as it's getting kind of getting sucked out.
Yep. So this is a much more effective tool. If you ever saw weighted extraction on an invoice, that would be what that's referring to, is just using the additional weight of a technician to pull more water out of that pad. This is a great tool. There's nothing wrong with it at all. This rover is probably a little bit better.
We just kind of stopped using this tool once we got into this because this is so much better. I mean, it's gonna pull the water out of the carpet pad to the point where you can't wring any more water out of it. So I mean, from that point, once I get the carpet to that point, it's gonna dry overnight. And then we can start focusing on the things that matter, right? Drying the walls, drying the sector, rather than wasting all of our equipment time trying to dry out the carpet. This is my favorite. You just get your Netflix out.
Right? It's pretty frowned upon to the client.
You can see it's drying, the carpet's getting dry right there.
Yep.
If anybody wants to try, feel free. Yeah, if anybody wants to try it, come on.
Yeah, we have our techs do the rover races in our spare time, you know.
You have forward and backwards. Don't go too fast.
Yeah, there is a speed limit on this thing. It's about a mile or a mile and a half per hour. It's probably in neutral.
Oh, I have to push it? Oh, there, okay, got it. Got it.
And then it turns as well. So while this process clearly will take a bit more time on the front end, it saves days and days of drying on the back end, which is the purpose of why it's used, you know?
Like Molotov.
So, yeah, so this would be an example of the newest, latest equipment that clearly gets the job done probably 10 times better than this wand ever hoped to accomplish. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a better understanding of how that equipment is used. Mike, yeah, we need 2 or 3 more volunteers to help out. Anyone want to give it a try?
It's pretty fun, guys. Hop up there. Come on.
Thank you, bud. I think, is it in reverse? Oh. Should be on, or that's in reverse now. There you go. Yeah. So yeah, that's always our big joke, is that you just kind of sit here and watch a movie while this is going, because it really does take a good bit of time to get done properly. But the end result, as you can see, is like, you know, in my opinion, far superior to anything we could have accomplished with any other tool. Heck yeah.
You got it.
If you get tired of listening, it might be a calling.
Anybody ever had a water loss where a bunch of carpet got affected? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Basement, or what was it?
A rental house and people actually turned on the swamp cooler in the winter, let things freeze, turned it off, and then in summer turned it on and left and flooded the whole house.
Yep.
From the attic down.
Yep. And that's common.
Yeah. That got me out of the rental business.
Yeah?
Yeah, those tenants.
Oh yeah. Yeah, just irresponsible.
Yeah.
Is that something that you're able to file a claim on in that instance? Because, yeah, because it's your first sign of knowledge and stuff like that of
Yeah,
it.
we filed the claim, that's taken care of, but that was...
You were just like, yeah, I'm out.
Yeah, that and everything else, yeah.
All right.
We winterized it.
Hey, can you move all the stuff onto that one?
He's trying to fancy.
Yep. Oh. Okay. Yeah, there's one up there, but you're gonna have to get on a ladder to get it.
We don't even use the snails anymore anyways.
Yeah. Okay. Other way. Small. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we typically go over it twice. You know, they say the manufacturer recommendation is like perpendicular. So you go over it one way, and then you go over it the other way. But really with one pass, it does 100 times more than any of the other machines would ever do. So we're getting way ahead of the game just by doing one pass with this machine rather than using anything else.
Yep.
And are you guys using like the, you know, when you stamp your carpet and stuff, they have like chemicals for that? You put something on there too, or you're just with this trying to just get the water?
We're just trying to get the water
Yeah.
as of right now. We do apply antimicrobial agents and things like that once we finish extracting. Just to kill anything that's in there, any microorganisms before we start putting everything on them.
Yep. Yeah, so really the first step in the process is inspection with these tools. Very similar to like Seth talked about with the fires. You want to get your eyes on it first and actually see what is affected. Are we looking at just walls, or are we looking at, a much, deeper situation? Then this extraction would be the second step, because this is going to pull the water out to a much greater degree than what our regular equipment would. So next, we're gonna walk back to the back and I'm gonna show you guys some of our different air movers and the differences between them. So these are the two basic fans that we use, or the two air movers that we use the most. This is called a centrifugal because it's moving the air in a circle before it moves it out. This is called an axial because it's moving it straight forward. It's never it's not moving a turbine, in other words. So I'll turn this one on first. If you basically start right here and move your way back, you'll see where it tends to fall off. These ones are between 600 and 800 CFM, I believe. And right around, I don't know, maybe here it's fallen off pretty good. You're welcome, you can all give it a try. And then this one also tends to tilt the air downward or not keep it all, in a perpendicular movement, if that makes sense. So that being said, I'll show you the difference between this one. This one's around 2,300 CFM, so around 3 times as much air production. And then you probably feel it all the way back there. You could fly a kite back there. No, but I mean, there really is a big difference between the two of these and how much you can accomplish with a fan that's much newer technology. You can dry the space faster with the potential for less removal of, materials. So that's always going to be the goal, is to dry it out as fast as possible. Typically, if you can get out there and dry something within 48 to 72 hours, or at least start that drying process, you're not really going to have the chance for microbial growth to start forming. So mold growth is going to form around 50 to 60% relative humidity. So if we can get out there, get the humidity down below that 60% threshold, the chances, and get materials unbound from one another, so like baseboards unbound from drywall and things like that, then you're not having, because then the relative humidity in that space is 100% basically, because it's such a small space. So if we can free up some of that area and get air movement on it, we can save a lot of those materials and keep the homeowner happy at the end of the day, because you're not tearing up their house. So yeah, that just kind of gives you the difference. Thank you. Okay. So here's an example of using the floor mats that we showed you initially in actual application. So this is marble flooring. It's actually in the same home that the complete solid oak living room was at the beginning of the presentation. So you can't find materials like this anymore. Like, you would not, I don't believe you'd be able to find this 40-year-old marble. and have it look the same way, because the whole bathroom was the same solid marble. So, I mean, just having the ability to dry situations like that where you typically don't have access to, that was actually able to be completely dried out and not have to be torn out, which is a huge blessing to someone, you know, in a situation where they're dealing with water damage. Yeah, empathy is probably like the biggest skill set you have to employ, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with as agents. You know, you have to empathize with someone's situation and really, you know, show them that you do care, because that's the first step in them understanding that you're there to help them and you're going to help them get back to the way things were before this ever happened. One thing that I didn't necessarily talk about is structural drying with heat. So this is a specialty piece of equipment that we use that's basically using our air movers that we would normally use, but adding an element of heat to it. Think of like trying to dry your hair. And if you were trying to use a blow dryer on cold, how much longer it would take than just adding that heat. What it actually does is allow more water to be in the air, and with more water, like it's a very layman's terms for it. Like, but scientifically, like more water can sit in that hot air, and then our equipment can pull more water out if more water's sitting in the air. So that's the real logic behind it. It's very hard to evaporate water below like 40 degrees because the dew point is so low or so small, you can't saturate a lot of water into that cold air. So in crawl spaces, in situations where there is no heat in the home, those are all examples of times when you would use heated equipment, and that would really give you a leg up in the drying process, as opposed to just putting down a bunch of equipment that's literally not going to do anything. So I'll go through dehumidifiers here in a little bit, but a dehumidifier doesn't work anything below 50 degrees. It's prime time. Extraction capabilities are going to be between 70 and 90 degrees, but anything below 50, it's not even going to work at all. So unless you can use things like heat or raise that temperature above that 50 degree threshold, someone's equipment's not going to be doing anything. This is a great slide. So health is always going to be of the utmost concern when it comes to either a fire loss or a water loss. And this is a questionnaire that's suited to find out if there's any sort of sensitivities or kind of like pre-existing concerns that we should view through that lens, or like, in other words, if there's any variables that we should take into consideration in the project. Because all of these things matter as far as like the amount, like what type of equipment that we're using, and if we're needing to use an air scrubber, things like that. So Seth went into a bit about what a HEPA air scrubber is. On water jobs, we're using them mainly for mold jobs, for any time it's a water job and we're going to be removing material. Just that removal of material is going to cause debris to go into the air. So you would have an air scrubber on that job to help keep that particulate down. But if somebody has pets, if somebody has allergies, any type of sensitivity, we're going to have an air scrubber on that job, because if we're blowing around all of the different dust and debris that's already sitting on any flat or horizontal surface, that's going to become an irritant to them. And so we want to put some sort of preventative measure in place to, one, it gives the homeowner a ton more peace of mind to know that there's a large HEPA air filter in their home. But two, it actually is doing something to help with their health. So that's the purpose behind why we use them on jobs, is to just keep the health and safety of your clients a top priority. This is just examples of common, kind of like lint, dust, pet dander, pet hair that you would find in homes. And that's the kind of stuff that we would be blowing around if we don't set something up to capture those debris particles. So next up is similar to the fire jobs. You would want to set up proper containment. So what does that look like? That looks like basically blocking off the affected area from the non-affected area. So, you know, the reason we use 2 zippers is so that we can actually fit material back through that door. A lot of times adjusters would ask us like, you know, why is there 2 zippers? You only have 1 door containment set up. It's like, yeah, but we'd rather work smarter, not harder, and have the containment fall down 15 times and have the technicians have to go back and set up the containment. So there really is, like, the more you learn about this, the more you learn that there's a method to the madness of the technicians, and that like there's a reason that they take so much time to, you know, put proper floor protection down, set proper containment, so they're not going back and having to, you know, basically fix it day to day. This is also extremely important because during the course of the work, the last thing you want, especially on like a sewer loss, is technicians going down into like a basement that was affected, walking back up through the main part of the house and not using floor protection. You know, they basically just cross-contaminated the entire project. And so, I mean, we don't just do these things, you know, for the sake of doing them, but we do them for a specific purpose, and it's to protect the home of the client. So let's go into a little bit more detail on category 1. Basically, this is any situation where it's either like a supply line, it's a freshwater source is what a lot of people would consider it, or plumbers commonly refer to it as clean water source. But yeah, so anything that overflows with no contaminants, you know, such as an appliance malfunctioning, those types of things. Now, the caveat to this is that Category 1 water is only Category 1 water for a set amount of time. It can degrade categories after that 48 to 72 hours that we talked about, or even faster depending on what variables are at play. You know, just if there's a lot of organic material, that's going to happen faster because then
Clean water flows right through a cat box, automatically it's cat 3 per se.
Yep.
Even though it came from a clean source.
Yep. So yeah. So if clean water flows through contaminated materials, such as either you know, soil like the ground, or to his point like a litter box, or like, I don't know, some people don't pick up after their pets, so we've seen like pet feces in homes before. It's like, it's not common, but it does happen, so I do bring it up because that could happen on a job that you're working on. So if clean water touches those materials, it then becomes automatically Category 3 water, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But the second category of water is what plumbers commonly refer to as gray water. And so that's going to be anything like your dishwasher drain, your washing machine drain, anything with detergent, those types of things. It's also going to be if your toilet backed up but there was no feces in it, that would be considered Category 2 water as well. Basically, it's just these categories are put into play because it's based on the amount of microbial growth that could exist in that water. So Category 2, there's just more microbial growth than Category 1. And then Category 3, more microbial growth. The only way to truly test these things is an industrial hygienist, which Seth brought up in regards to the fire jobs. They can also do that in regards to water jobs. It's not common on every job, but sometimes, like if water has sat for an unknown amount of time, let's say someone's elderly, and they're like, yeah, you know, I haven't been down in this basement for 2 weeks. So then that's an opportunity to do something like that, because then you can show them, is it Category 1 water or is it Category 2 or 3? So what time is it? Let's take maybe a 5-minute break, guys, and just quick stretch, grab some water or use the restroom if you need to, and then we'll pick back up here in about 5 minutes. Glad I used a leather bag. I didn't realize that.
No, I'm good.
My wife found that bag at the thrift store for $15, and it's Buffalo Jackson, which we looked up online. It's like a $250 bag. I'm like, who just like goes and just like, oh, I don't think I need this anymore.
Somebody who's, their mother just recently passed or whatever, they don't realize what it's worth.
Right.
They don't.
Or they don't work a job where they need it anymore, so they're like, I don't need that old thing. But it came with the dust bag and everything. It was crazy.
But back when I used to be a nanny, the people I worked for, the kind of stuff they'd throw out or donate, it's just like, that's worth more than you're paying me in a month.
Oh my God. Where'd you say at?
I used to be a nanny.
Oh, okay. Yep. Yeah, I bet.
Healthy families.
Doctors, lawyers, people like that. High-end business folk.
Yeah.
What made you transition out of that?
It's not too hard to leave the kids, do it, be with them from
build
when
such
they're
a
less than a year old, 11, 12 hours a day.
Right, you build such a good relationship
and
together.
Once they start going to school full time, they don't need you as much. And they let you go, it's like, it's hard to walk away from it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah. I never thought I even liked kids.
Thank you, Bella.
I had one. And now, I could imagine.
Yeah, I knew him when he had that mentality that he's talking about before he had a son.
Surprise! You have a baby. We've known each other at least like 2 years now, right?
Yeah, going on close to 3, I think.
Close to 3, yeah. Funny how life works out.
Isn't it, dude? What a long, strange trip.
What a long, strange trip.
Yep. Thank you, Betta.
Next time you see my buddy Tim Pye at the Jazz Festival again,
Oh.
about that bag, he'll flip.
Cool.
Yeah.
He's a big leather man, right?
He's a big thrift guy, anything. So he was with me when I broke my foot snowboarding, and then I gave him my pass because I obviously couldn't use it. The next week he went and he dislocated his shoulder from his collarbone. The pass is cursed. It's over $50,000 in medical bills. And that's so he's a vet, so he's just on full disability. So all he does is drive to thrift stores all day, every day, and that's what he does for fun.
That's fun. My wife and I love to go thrifting.
His house, which was already a museum of oddities, it's 10 times more so now.
Dang, yeah, we gotta check one another's collections out at some point. I gotta go.
I think
Hit him
he
up.
had mentioned you specifically because I told you that you have similar interests. I said, yeah, let him come on over whenever.
Heck yeah. Alrighty. Let's get into category 3 water. This is the fun stuff, guys. This is like, you're gonna be riveted once we talk about this. So up until this point, we've talked about everything that, these are all materials we can save. If it's category 1 water, and it's in porous materials, even sometimes with category 2 water and porous materials, we can still dry those situations in place and avoid a lot of demo and costly repair. That is not the case with category 3, so something you guys can just memorize is that anytime it's a category 3 loss or sewage, black water loss, any porous material is going to have to come out. So anything from vanities, baseboards, tile if it's on top of subfloor, just because that water is going to get trapped between the tile and the subfloor. Same with linoleum, vinyl on subfloor. Basically anything that's not tile on top of concrete will have to be removed. And then the only exception to that is going to be structural. So anything framing wise is going to be staying in place and cleaned and treated. We'll talk about that process. But Category 3 water doesn't necessarily just mean sewage water. So it could mean something as simple as like what Mike mentioned with Category 1 water just crossing over a contaminated material. Or it could be Category 1 water that sat in place for a week or two before somebody found out. So those are all situations where once it's deemed as Category 3 water, those materials are going to have to be removed. Another example would be like storms. So any type of storm water. So the floods back about, maybe 10 years ago or so now, up in Johnstown and whatnot.
Even the Denver water floods that just happened.
Yeah, even the Berkeley water floods here from about a month or two ago. Everyone familiar with what happened there in Berkeley? So there was a water main that broke. It was at like 44th and Perry or something like that, 45th and Perry. So right there in like the Highlands, Berkeley neighborhood. And it flooded 8 blocks. So from 44th or 45th all the way, like 1 block vertically and then 8 blocks horizontally. So there was about 80 homes that were affected. And the way that environment is that the homes on the outside of that street are on a high point, and then the homes in the center of that street are at a low point. So even when they have heavy rains, they normally have, standing water in those areas. Those people had, I'll show you some pictures here in a moment, but they had 10 feet of water in the home just in a matter of an hour. We watched people wade through waist high with rakes, like hard metal rakes, trying to clear storm drains. So with the aging infrastructure of Denver, I would think more and more things like that will come to be. We've seen 2 in the last year, and I've done this for 4 years, and I had only seen 1 other than the 2 up till this year. So I think they are becoming more prevalent. I know not every agency offers the ability to cover things like that, but I would highly recommend if people come to you saying we want the best protection or we want to protect our assets as best as possible, if you have a policy that covers things like that, I would highly steer them in that direction, or at least explain the potential for things. I think that main that broke was a 100-year-old pipe, or it was from like the 20s or 30s. So I mean, these are mainly in older neighborhoods we're talking about, but they can happen in newer areas as well. So what a lovely picture. So if you look closely, you will see life is possible everywhere, I guess. So this is the disgusting example of Cat 3, and then this is the Berkeley example we talked about. That's not poop on the walls. That's just silt, or like just a ton of debris from outside. So this was crazy. Going into this house felt like going into the Titanic. Opening the doors, you have to pull them open slowly.
Is that water now?
That's all water. Yeah, I'll show you the next picture. That shows it better. So that's water about close to knee high. Wearing knee-high muck boots, it was almost coming over the top. And that was, you can tell the whole basement in its entirety was completely underwater. So this gentleman hired out 3 pump trucks, professional, huge semi trucks that are pump trucks. And they were all in his basement at one time sucking all the water out. That amount of pressure in his home actually turned his sprinkler main on. He had swam down there and turned his main off, and the pressure from that suction had actually turned his main back on. So the point that I'm making there is the amount of pressure that water exerts on these structures, especially in the event that there's waist high water in there. That's so much gravity and that's so much weight being pushed out on that structure that it's really important to take into consideration everything that's been affected, not just dry it out. But those are situations where you'd want to call in a structural engineer or someone to actually take a look at the foundation and the structure to make sure everything's safe.
Is that in the basement?
That is in the basement. Yep. So that's their basement bar area. And that couch basically lifted up in the water, and then when the water receded, sat where it could.
So when you open the stairwell, it's full of water all the way up.
Yep. When it comes to sewage, what's important? Clearly, it's going to be the safety of our workers and the safety of the way that they take care of things so that they don't cause secondary damage in the homeowner's home. So it's very similar PPE to what Seth talked about. They're going to be using white suits anytime they're demoing drywall that doesn't have Cat 3 material. And then they would be using yellow suits anytime that they're in either crawl spaces, which we'll get to in a moment, or anytime that they're dealing with mold or sewage. Just because, even the white suits will not protect against mold. Those spores can get through those suits. So just important to wear the proper PPE and be wearing PPE, especially in environments where you're working around, human feces. If you're not wearing PPE, there's lots of health risks that come into play at that point. And so once again, going back to like the risks and asbestos and stuff like that, it's just not something that proper technicians take risks with. They wear the proper PPE. So something else that's done on Category 3 losses, anytime you have a concrete floor in a basement and you have a backup, you would actually power wash that or steam clean and power wash that concrete floor. And what that does is really remove all that material, removes the odor. And this particular piece of equipment doesn't aerosolize the material. So if you take a mop or a broom and brush it around, you're actually aerosolizing the material. Whereas this has a sponge and keeps everything contained in that, so that you're not getting things airborne that you don't want to be airborne. So this is something that we see all the time here in Colorado, broken drain line or broken drain pipe in someone's crawl space. Because this happens for a number of reasons. People don't spend a lot of time in their crawl spaces or rarely go into them, if ever. People can be older and just really not with it with what's going on in their home, if that makes sense. And so things can deteriorate rather quickly in the event that you have a broken pipe under your home, and every time you're using your utilities inside, some portion or sometimes all of that water is just being dumped into your crawl space. So these are particularly hard jobs to do, very labor-intensive jobs. And we'll kind of walk you through a little bit of the process, but I wanted to show you one. So this is one, this is Mike's favorite job. So this is a client, this is actually an Applewood older home, probably made in the 60s or so, 50s, 60s, something like that. Tells the plumber that he's been dealing with this problem for 5 years. And so basically the broken drain pipe had eroded out a portion of that soil in his crawl space. So it's hard to really estimate a job like that because you don't know how deep the pit is. And so basically the way that this is done is any water or any what we would consider something that's close to water at that point is extracted. Anything that is then sitting on the surface there is still clearly affected soil. We muck and till that soil and treat it with antimicrobial. It's usually like a peroxide base or something that's gonna really kill anything that's in that soil. And then the technicians watch and wait for when the soil's no longer bubbling, or in other words, there's no longer living organisms in that soil. So they're gonna basically clean, till and treat that soil, and it's a very labor-intensive process. These jobs typically take a few days to take care of. And that goes back to that point I was telling you about having to take breaks often. So they always have to have 2 technicians down in the crawl space when they're working, because it's a confined space. So that's like an OSHA law. And then on top of that, you have to swap out, rotate one, like, so basically you'd have to have 3 people, 2 are always working together, the third person's taking a break, and you're just rotating through those 3 folks. So that's why these are so labor intensive. And yeah, they're definitely not like any restoration company's favorite jobs, but it's a nature of what you're dealing with. Like, you know, when you're the person that cleans up these types of problems, that's who gets called. And so you really have to serve all types of situations. This is another example of where it's not like a pit, it more or less just spread out to the entirety of the crawl space. And so it's the same process as far as what we talked about. Only step I didn't talk about yet is just installing a new vapor barrier. So a lot of times once you've cleaned, tilled, and treated the soil, you're still gonna have odor in it, especially if it's 5-year-old affected material. Like, you're never gonna get that to fully deodorize. And so the purpose of the vapor barrier is to keep out that moisture, keep it from affecting the joists, and keep out extra humidity from being down there in the crawl space where it doesn't need to be, but it's also to prevent odors. Okay, so contents and water claims. So everyone's familiar with what I mean by contents and, you know, why that would be necessary. Basically, a lot of times what we're dealing with, and I'm going to go into a few different examples just to kind of help you visualize things, but a lot of times what we're dealing with is having to remove carpet or having to remove a section of carpet or flooring and then having to replace all of that flooring. And so you can't put new flooring down on if there's like a, you know, queen size bed or if there's a, you know, sectional couch. You really have to get those materials out or into a different environment before you're actually able to continue work to be done. So many times the contents portion of the job can actually exceed the cost of the mitigation if there's storage involved, if they're going to be packing out the materials to a climate controlled facility, storing them, and then packing them back once rebuild is done. I mean, that can be $40, $50, $60, $100,000 just for contents alone if we're talking like, you know, multiple rooms affected. So that's just something that I think is good perspective to give you all, just that the cost of a claim can be, you know, raised exponentially when contents come into play. So a few examples of like kind of the spectrum we see. So I go into a home, I either see, man, there's like, they have nothing on the ground, this place is immaculate, everything's really well taken care of, but still, if a sewage loss happened here, we're gonna have to deal with contents. It doesn't, like, just because they're like super neat, everything's organized, everything's perfect, we can't work around those items. We really need to, you know, free up the space so that the work can be done properly, and then we can put the items back in. The next thing that you'll see is just, you know, it's probably same amount of stuff, but smaller space. And so it just feels a little bit more tight, or it feels like there's more stuff there. And then kind of the last thing you'll see is just when there's like way too much stuff everywhere and you're like, is this hoarding status? I don't know. It kind of borders, it might borderline on it, but I'm not here to judge, you know, like I'm just here to tell you about the spectrum of contents that you deal with going into folks' homes.
Do you do an upcharge? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Do you do an upcharge for people that are hoarders?
Well, so the way that contents is going to be done, and I'll go into a little more detail in the next picture, but basically all your contents are going to be packed up into corrals or into these like units or cubes.
Like those little guys right there?
No, like those.
Oh.
So, yeah, so basically however many of those it would take, however much cubic feet, that's what you're charging to insurance. And that's, so yes, in short, because they have more volume of stuff, it's going to cost more to get it packed out and to get it stored and to get it packed back in. So yeah, it's still going to be the same cost per cubic foot or whatnot, but yeah, it would cost more for more stuff. And then don't have any skeletons in your closet because someone might find them one day.
That was bad.
Sorry, it's my dad joke for the day. Kind of piggybacking off of what Seth was talking about with what happens when a homeowner tries to work on a claim. Has anyone in here ever dealt with a homeowner trying to work on a water claim?
How do they just ignore it and
Well-
insurance doesn't cover it?
Yeah. So what do they call it then? Negligence?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It either becomes negligence or it falls into a category that's not covered by their policy because they waited too long.
Or, we'll cover what the initial damage would have done, but the amount that was left
Yep.
to get worse, we're not touching.
Bingo. That happens. I would say that's becoming more often than not. What happens is that they'll cover the water damage portion, and it depends on the policy. So I'm not here to discuss what's covered and what's not. It's all dependent on the policy. But yeah, that is very common for that to happen. So yeah, mold is common for folks that try and deal with their own water damage claims. I hear all the time, well, this is Colorado, right? It's like pretty dry here. And it's like, yeah, but you just had like gallons and gallons of water be released into like a controlled environment within your home. So that like the outside weather is irrelevant at that point. Yes, it's dry in Colorado as a whole, but not in places like basements, crawl spaces, places where you commonly have water damage. Those are typically going to be your wettest environments and the environments that retain moisture the most. It's very common in Colorado for folks to have sump pumps to kind of discharge some of that groundwater or some of that water that has the potential of getting into folks' homes. You'll see it common that those go out every 3 or 5 years, or sometimes that's covered, sometimes it's not. But yeah, those are just those are projects that we've commonly seen people try and take on. And it's always best if you can talk to the agent ahead of time, make sure that you have coverage for, things that are going to be more common. If you live in an older home, you have a finished basement, you probably want sewer backup coverage. Is that something that you all recommend to folks when they have finished basements?
Yes.
What?
Regardless of what you have.
Heck yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Because I can't tell you how many times I've run across situations where someone has a $20,000 or $30,000 problem, and that's just the cleanup of the problem, not even including any repairs. And then they either have a capped policy, which I understand because some policies will cap it at a certain amount, or they'll have no coverage at all. And it's pretty common in those instances that they could have had an endorsement or coverage for that for like $30 a year or $50 a year, which would have been very minimal compared to their like total premium. So yeah, mold is very common. And then for problems that go like, I guess, unaddressed or sometimes unseen, depending on where they happen, mushrooms can also happen. So this was a sump pump that went out, and it was, there's basically like a television stand, and this was behind the television stand. So they really weren't, it's not an area of the house that you look at, but it happened to be like right where the sump pump was placed. And so when it failed, that's the first place that the water got to. So this only took about, I want to say 10 days or less for mushrooms to start growing. So it's not like, I know when agents, when adjusters, when folks at insurance companies hear the word mold, they'll think, oh, long-standing problem, or oh, that's been going on forever. That's not always the case. Mold can grow quickly, 48 to 72 hours. And like really, as long as there's no rotten materials, many times those problems can be covered as long as the person has coverage around mold. Or as long as it was like, a proactive, as soon as they realized there was damage, they called, they made the claim and went from there. It wasn't something that they sat on and didn't do anything about. So we had a job that, and I went into this a little bit earlier, but basically a woman thought that she had gotten the place dried out. She said that the fire department came out with fans and placed them there for 3 or 4 days and then came and picked them up when they were done, which I thought was a little bit odd because I had never seen a fire department actually like place equipment. I still don't think I've gotten the full story there on that one, but at the end of the day, she thought her entire place was dry. Because she's like, yeah, it's been a month and a half. This is perfectly fine. When we went down into the crawl space, which is about as tall as we are, this was on pretty much every piece of insulation. And I just realized today they installed it backwards because they should have installed it the other way because that's where the living area is. Basically all this insulation is going to have to come out now. Like that could have all been prevented had the agent recommended that she call a mitigation company and not a general contractor. So just make sure that who you're calling is well suited and geared and equipped to deal with water problems and not just repairs or rebuild, because they're two completely different creatures. So basically we're looking at probably like 200 or 300 square feet of insulation removal. Having to sand and HEPA vacuum all of those joists and subfloor, and then now having to remove tile in that kitchen that's actually placed on top of chicken wire. So it's going to be like a very labor-intensive process to get removed, all because it wasn't dried out properly. So that really goes to show the importance of getting the right folks out there the first time, making sure that it's dry. Someone that actually has one of these, you can't look at a wall and say, oh, yep, I think it's dry. You know, I mean, you can do that, but that doesn't make your statement accurate, you know. It really helps to have the equipment needed to, you know, inspect and test unique situations. So if a client ever has just like kind of a weird problem that they're unsure of or unsure of if it's covered, I'd recommend calling someone out there, getting a free inspection done, and then that way they at least have a frame of reference to make a decision off of. Other things that are common to happen when you try and deal with things yourself. So this looks like almost like someone had quite a bit of water go through the ceiling, never addressed it, and then lo and behold, you have a lot of mold there. So basically you're looking at something that could have initially been completely dried out, everything dried in place, no repair needed, and now you're looking at tearing all of that drywall out and none of it being covered. So please don't let clients leave issues unaddressed and let their property value diminish just for the sake of like thinking that they know the answer. I know many people think that they're experts on many things, but sometimes it's best to call someone that, you know, has certifications or has, you know, proper experience around that issue. And especially when it's a free inspection or it's not like a, you know, you're not calling someone out there to give them a sales pitch. That's really someone that can provide education and provide them with like knowledge around their home, ways to deal with problems when they come across them, things like that. Here's a question for you. Is all mold dangerous, or is there certain types of mold that are more dangerous, or does anybody know anything about mold, or do you want me to give you a little bit of a...
Some's going to be more dangerous than others, but if you have mold, want to get rid of it right away.
Yep. So it's...
Get rid of all mold because every bathroom has mold.
Yeah, so you're both right in a sense. So any environment's going to have mold. It's going to matter what types of spores are present and the concentration of those spores. So on mold jobs, it's common to have someone go out and do water testing and then take that testing actually to a lab where they do a spore count. Very scientific. There's no objectivity around it or subjectivity around it. It's very like, you know, this is the way that it is. And then they provide you with a report around the types of mold, the count in each, and then if that count is considered elevated, highly elevated, or what that looks like. It's a very common misconception that like, oh, black mold's the worst for you, or like, oh yeah, like, you know, basically Dateline in the 80s did a presentation or a documentary on Stachybotrys or black mold, and then that took off like wildfire, like many things on TV do. But it didn't really provide the other side of the story, which is there's a ton of other types of molds that are also dangerous to you. The blue here is what's called penicillium. If you're allergic to penicillin, that'll basically make you not be able to breathe within like 10 or 15 minutes. So like there is definitely seriousness around this. This is not something to take lightly when you hear someone say that they may have water damage or that they may have mold, just because, especially if somebody is predisposed to having weaknesses in their immunity around mold, this could wreak havoc to someone. It could hospitalize them. It could, I don't want to say it could potentially kill them, but it really could in certain instances. So it's really important that we do take these types of things seriously, and we don't just think because we live in a high plains desert, we don't have any mold. At least 5 or 6 times a week, I would say, we go into homes with mold. That's not a small number, you know? So just kind of like some differences in different types of molds and what they look like. So, I mean, you can pretty much have mold that is every different color under the sun. Those are all going to be different types or different spores. But yeah, just the one that people are most familiar with is the Stachybotrys or the black mold. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions on water jobs in general, the process around them, contents, differences between jobs like category 1 versus category 3? Has anybody had a water loss that was, I guess, out of the ordinary or something that you hadn't seen before? Yeah.
They send away the team that was coming to clean it up, the restoration team, because even though we were paying for it, he thought they were charging too much and wanted to get a second estimate late on a Friday afternoon.
Yep, I would say that's common. So pricing for a restoration company should be pretty standardized, or should be like, I mean, we get Xactimate pricing sent over to us. That's meant to be a baseline. So in other words, like even the person that created Xactimate, the owner, says that, hey, this was never meant to be a standardized price list. This is meant to be like a benchmark, so that if you have, you know, differences in fuel cost or differences in your business model, you can take those into consideration. But for the most part, everything is pretty standardized, or there is pretty set pricing. So yeah, so but they just felt like they maybe knew how to do it better, or wanted to get someone to come out cheaper.
Late on a Friday, so water sat all weekend, and sewage sat all weekend, I should say.
Yeah, and so then what you get into is what we call secondary damage, or in other words, like once water sits in an environment for longer than that 48 to 72 hours, you're looking at extensive amount of more repair, more demo, just things that in all reality could have been avoided. And then you're running the risk of if the insurance company you work with is going to cover it or not. Because some will say, you know, well, you knew about this from X date, like why wasn't anything done about it? Typically speaking, if it's just a few days, that's not a big deal. But still, in the nature of what we deal with, every minute counts, you know, every day counts. We want to get out there as quickly as possible. That's how you, what's called stabilize the environment and basically begin that drying process. And that's really the difference maker between the structure starting to deteriorate or things like mold beginning to occur, and your client having a regular run-of-the-mill experience where everything gets dried out quickly, there's relatively minimal amount of repair, and really honestly it's a lot smoother of a transition from mitigation to rebuild, because there's not a ton of flooring or a ton of drywall or things like that that need to come out. Yeah. If it's a sewage backup, that doesn't change things a ton because either way, any porous material is going to come out. But still, the longer that water sits there, the more it has the potential to spread out. Water has capillary action, which is like how plants feed themselves or whatnot. So in other words, anytime water's sitting in this carpet, even if it's just on the carpet and it wicked up through the concrete, it's going to then affect the walls over time. Now it's code that the walls are floating. In other words, that the drywall is about 2 inches off the ground in the basement, and then the baseboard covers that up. But if you go into any old home where that wasn't a code, you'll commonly see that, where the water will just wick up the walls. It'll also happen if it's on the first floor or second floor and that happens, in a bathroom or a kitchen, it'll wick up the walls. So a lot of times a homeowner will think that they know the extent of the problem, or, oh, the water's contained right here. But you'll go into other rooms where there's water. Water's just a very mischievous creature. And so the last thing you want to do is just think, oh, all the problems contained here. The best thing you can do is to have a professional come out, take a look at it, and actually confirm. Like, really, honestly, it gives you peace of mind to know, hey, there are no more materials affected. Like, you were right. Like, it is just the area under the sink. But it's better for them to know than to figure out a problem when it's not covered down the line. So this is an example of flooring when folks think, oh yeah, this will be fine. I'll just like kind of leave this water here. And then it sits under linoleum or in between vinyl and the subfloor. And you just end up with warping. You end up with mold sitting between that and the glue. Just not a good, healthy environment for anyone. And so, like, think about how much harder it is to walk through your house with the waviness in your floor. Why would you want that? Like, come on now. Not very effective. So just a few more examples of mold or folks that, thought an issue was solved and it was not.
Is it real hard to get mold out of concrete like that?
What you thought the back wall is concrete?
No, I think it's one.
No, that's a unfinished garage. So it's fire taped, but that's just drywall that's not been painted. So that would all need to come out at that point. So mold would be considered Cat 3. Any type of mold job that you're working on would be considered a Category 3 job. It does not. That's also a great question. So if a client ever asks you if there's mold growing on concrete, chances are that's what's called efflorescence, which is basically just when water collects in an area and then evaporates, any sediments or anything that was in that water sticks to the surface and kind of crystallizes. So over time, you'll get this kind of like built up layer that many people would look at and be like, that looks strange, that looks like it might be mold. But if it's on concrete, cinder block, things like that, mold needs an organic food source. So it loves like that backside of that insulation paper, like I showed in the one picture. It loves drywall and the paper backing to the drywall. Loves the carpet pad. That's why like so quickly when someone has a water loss on carpet and pad, they'll notice that smell, because anything that's in that pad is just getting odorized at that point.
Is it true that it can go dormant and then if water is reintroduced?
100%. 100%. So the 4 things that mold needs to grow is water, a food source, stagnant air, and what was the last thing I'm looking for? That's all, it only needs those 3?
Some like it dark, but they don't.
Oh, yeah.
Don't always.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. And heat would accelerate things. So the more heat you have, it would accelerate things. But we still have mold grow in Colorado in the wintertime. So don't think just because somebody's having a problem in the winter that they won't also experience mold problems down the road. Yeah. So basically, I hope that you learned something that is beneficial. I do have some time that I still need to fill up. so I can walk you through some other items. I don't think I went through the dehumidifiers that we use. So a dehumidifier is basically a piece of equipment that we use to take airborne water or vaporized water, transition that into solid water, and then get it out of the environment. So, is Mike still here? Or no? Or yeah, can someone grab one for me? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that's a great question. So those are all would be considered contents. That's the area that we're moving into here. We just started contents over the last month or two. So for the time being, the answer would be yes. But if it's something that we can't take on, we have a couple of partners that we work with. Phoenix Contents is one of them, and CRDN is one of them. They're both well equipped for textiles, for books, for things like you mentioned. And so if it's something we can't take on, then we would,
Suggestions for small jobs.
like given,
Box of books, or box of photos.
Are they wet or molded?
wet or moldy?
Both stages.
Okay. She's just asking for suggestions on like basically small batch contents, if there's someone you could give that out to, or
If you come across them right away, literally you can take them, you can lay them out one by one and dry them. If they're stuck to the glass, if they're in frames, leave them in there. If they don't peel off, you can actually get them wet again, and then you peel them off. But nowadays, with our technology, for the photo technology with scanning, if it's stuck to the glass, you just take the glass in there and lay it on and scan it, and then you've saved the image. And what's the number one thing everybody wants to save out of their house for a fire or a flood? It's always the photos. It's their photos is number one. You know? So yeah,
Always comes up in genealogy discussions.
yeah.
How to preserve the old photos.
I mean, you can take photos, and there are content companies who specialize just in photos.
yep.
But literally, I mean, I used to do that. I was the guy that specialized, and really, you are drying. And I mean, if you can still get them apart, and then you manipulate them. It's kind of just like a book. If a book is wet, and you manipulate periodically every hour, and you're flipping through the pages.
Then you
or
dry one out one by one?
You know, you're laying them out. Now they're going to still get wavy. They're going to still be wavy, but then you can take them and
Save 'em.
scan.
Nice.
Freezing.
You can freeze dry. You can freeze dry. Sublimation is what it's called. Typically, that's not a great technology for the photos that are already printed.
It's more for medical records in that.
It's for a lot of paper products.
Yeah.
The freeze drying, and what you do, it's well, typically it's for documents that can't be replaced. Now, medical records used to be the number one thing, but a lot of medical offices now are backed up digitally.
Yep.
You know, they're all converting over, you know, so I can't tell you how many times we've done jobs, or the industry does jobs. You go out there, you give them a bid, if you're going to do all this, and they go, well, we decided we're just going to throw them all away. We got it all backed up, you know, on a computer someplace, you know. That's what I asked you on day one, and they forgot. But yeah, you can do the freeze drying of documents, medical records, lawyers' offices, files. Lawyers are not very early adopters for digital, so lots of times their files are still on paper. Okay, lawyers' books, and books are another common thing to freeze dry. If they're first run books, like collector books, or if they're old and can't be replaced, if you can't buy a new one, and then it comes down to what's cost effective. How much is it going to cost me to freeze dry it versus how much is an insurance company going to have to pay to replace it?
So if
So you have that
Yep.
thing.
So if
We
the
try to-
replacement cost is lower than the cost to clean, then they'll typically replace.
Yeah. And then the other is religious artifacts. Work for the archdiocese lots of times. The Catholic Church has a lot of stuff, and a lot of their stuff can't be replaced, so that would be a candidate. Pastors' libraries are another one. All those Bibles and all of their books. pastors, my dad was a preacher. They don't have a lot of money, at least my dad didn't, but he had a lot of books, and some of those were replaceable. So it's so that's another candidate, And the way the sublimation works, just really quickly, you freeze it and you stop any further damage. So if it's a box of papers, maybe even photographs, you literally can stick it in your deep freeze, right? And then if it's in a box, you want to leave plenty of room around it so that there's room for air. And then it goes into a freeze-dry chamber. And without going into all the science, they put it under vacuum. They put it under vacuum and then they raise the temperature. And though it never goes back to a water state, it goes to a vapor state and then it's sucked out of the chamber. So it goes from frozen to dry, right? So those things are candidates for that. But what you want to do is talk to a professional restorer, because they have resources, all through our network, and other restorers are the same way. They know where to get, because there are people who specialize.
Yeah, in other words, like even when we specialize in soft contents, we probably will never focus on electronics or like art, fancy pieces of art, things like that, because that's just not going to be the market we go after. But we have partners that we can work with that can easily meet those needs. It's really pretty much a niche, so the amount of people that can meet those needs here in the city is like you could count on one hand when it comes to those like very specialized types of things. Let's go into this a little bit. So this is our dehumidifier. This one's cool because it's on wheels. The old ones were not on wheels. And so my technicians and all technicians across the country are very appreciative of the wheels. These things are not light. They have to be trucked around, up and down stairs, all throughout properties. So while the wheels seem small, it's a huge upgrade and a big addition. These ones are digital. So we can actually remote monitor through like, it's Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or whatever you call it? Yeah, Bluetooth enabled. So basically, our technicians can see current conditions as far as if the equipment's on. If we're going out to a job and it's not drying, and we look at the equipment log and it shows, oh, as soon as we leave each day, the equipment turns off. And right before we get there each day, the equipment turns back on. Wonder why the place isn't drying out. Those are things we can start to look at and really see trends where we really couldn't before. What are some other advantages of the remote monitoring, Micah? Is really being able, can't we hit certain temperatures and then the dehu would?
The big thing is really just being able to, we can get a pretty good sense, when we're not on site on what's going on without having to go on site. So, if we know, if we leave in breaker trips, we know we need to come back and take care of it. Or if we see that humidity levels aren't dropping, we know that something's wrong. So, it really gives us a good opportunity to be able, we still have to send techs out every 24 hours, but it gives us the ability to kind of detect issues earlier and make sure we're drying properly.
So basically this big box just condenses all that vaporized water into the machine, and then there's a clear line that pumps the water out. We usually go into like a floor drain or into like a bathtub drain or something like that. But basically you're taking all that water that's in that environment and then you're getting it out of there. So that's why we say that extraction is so much easier, because when the water's already in its liquid state, you're gonna be able to remove it way faster than when you have to transfer the water with those air movers into vaporized water, then transfer it back into water and then get it out. You see like just how much more of a process that is. So, I mean, these things are really our workhorse, or this is really like what probably does the most amount of work on a water job. But without the air movers, you don't get the water lifted off the surfaces and evaporated to the point where this would do anything. So that's why they work in tandem with one another. And that's why, sometimes in a space this big, you may see 5 or 6 fans, all in a circular motion, because they're trying to really create almost like a vortex or a tornado. And that is what pulls the moisture out of the building materials into the air and allows the dehumidifier to do its job as efficiently as it can. So yeah, even, I guess this is just a point to make, even on a clean water loss like this, we would still remove these baseboards because I mentioned this to some folks, but I'm not sure if everyone heard me when I was talking about the fans. Anytime the relative humidity is over 60%, you're gonna have mold growth. And because the baseboard and the drywall meet together, it creates such a small amount of area, it's pretty much 100% humidity. So you'll have mold growth on the back of the baseboards, on the drywall, you'll have warped baseboards. So those are all reasons why we just take those off initially, even if we're not removing anything else, just so we're not creating an environment where mold can grow. Anybody have any questions?
So depending on how much water that the dehumidifier puts out, does that kind of give you an indication of how much water was lost in that area?
Yeah, definitely. These can pull out how many pints a day?
So under ideal conditions, which ideal conditions like 90% humidity, 90 degrees, they can pull out, I think those are about 130 pints per day. So, you know, cover all you're never going to see ideal conditions, but they can pull out quite a bit of water per day.
Yep.
So, but yeah, the only time we really measure the water is when we're in a big commercial loss and we have to put 50-gallon trash buckets because we don't have quick access to a
drain
or something, or a drain line to put it in. So we'll do it for those. It's pretty cool to see. We're doing pretty well.
Yeah. So.
What else will you guys do to dry that we may mess up?
Yeah, so when you guys leave, we'll put the floor mat drying system down. We will put basically 4 or 5 fans here all blowing in a circle, and then we'll have the dehu in the middle. And then on a water job, we would have an air scrubber anytime we're doing any demo or, you know, the dust and debris is gonna be kicked up when we turn those fans on. So we would use an air scrubber too.
What's the like moisture reading of the carpet right now?
Yeah,
Sure,
great question.
What, 99.999%?
So,
Yeah.
so the pad is still reading at, and pretty much all of it's still soaked because we didn't take enough passes on it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, like in an ideal environment, we'd probably spend an hour or so just, you know, yeah, or probably 30 minutes on a section that size, just going back and forth and doing passes. Because yeah, even though it got a ton, we put a ton of water on it. Probably a lot more than you'd typically have under most losses unless you have a pipe break.
The thing I like to say, it's actually we go, our technicians go to Drying Academy in Indianapolis. The carpet and pad, we're essentially drying for free because the drywall, the wood, everything else is so much harder to dry. We're going to have to place the same amount of fans and dehus. Carpet and pad are almost drying for free because of how much energy it's going to take to dry the wood, the drywall, the structural materials, things like that.
So another point this brings up is that once you get, because we really should have had all of these running at the same time, once you get 4 or 5 of these fans, the dehumidifier, the air scrubber, it starts to sound almost like you're sitting next to the the wing on the airplane. Like it really is quite loud. It produces a good bit of heat just from the air movers and the electricity of that movement. So you'll take an environment that's probably sitting at 70 degrees, it'll be up in the low 80s or mid 80s. So it's common for folks to complain about things like temperature or noise or, if folks ever complain about electricity use, make sure that they realize that they can submit their previous bills compared to what the bill is for the month that the work is completed in or the months, and they'll pay them the difference. Typically, from our experience. I'm not going to say what they'll cover or what they won't, but I'm saying that's at least something to bring up to them and have them ask and see if it can get covered. Because I can't tell you how many times someone that's like, you know, so worried about their bill being over like $100 or something like that, they're like, these fans are going to drive me insane just from the power they're producing. So yeah, that's a fantastic question. But yeah, it is going to raise that temperature. It is something that I would recommend is that if they're complaining about those things, you can always recommend, if they have coverage for it, for them to stay somewhere else for a few days while the work's being done. Especially if it's like their home office, which is so common nowadays that folks work from home. If it's just going to be 2 or 3 days of drying, or even 4 or 5, it's much better for them to have peace of mind and sleep well and not have a bunch of fans going, if that's a possibility. So I think more often than not, people just don't even think that that is an option.
One thing I would say is, if we can allow equipment to run 24/7 to its job, it's going to be so much less expensive. So, and we typically do like to raise the temperature up in the house, prevent the most evaporation. If it's possible for them to use ALE, in the long term, it's probably going to save money on the plane, because there'll be less demo, less rebuild, less time, the equipment's there. We do try, and especially if it's my kitchen and it's the entire kitchen, we do try and say, you might want to look for alternative living while this is going on.
Yeah. So let's go into timelines based on that. So average timeline for mitigation is anywhere from like 3 or 4 days up to like 7 or 10. I would say most mitigation is not going to take longer than 10 days. The only exception to that would be if there's asbestos abatement involved in the mitigation. So we have a sister company, Paragon. If you ever have any asbestos abatement needs, they'd be happy to help you. They do free estimates as well. But yeah, that's definitely an area where, we're seeing more and more things happen. As far as like, most people don't think that things would even test hot for asbestos, given the current state that we're in, and like that most builds are new. But you still run across asbestos in 2 or 3 year old homes. So it's really pretty across the board. Let's see. Did I answer the question? So basically, if you guys don't have any other questions, I don't really know how else to fill 15 minutes.
When do you use containment on a water job?
Sure.
Containment in the chamber, maybe talk about the drying chamber.
Sure. So the main reason why we set up the containment is to prevent any cross-contamination of that environment, and then to also isolate the space that's unaffected from the space that is affected, so that we're not using this equipment to dry a bunch of area that's already dry. So that really is the purpose of the containment, is to basically take a space 10 times as big, isolate it into only what's affected, and then focus the drying efforts in that area. That's how you get things dried the fastest. And yeah, that's basically just how you are the most efficient at what you do. So without containment, there'd be certain situations where things would either take 10 or 15 days to dry, or they would never dry at all. But there's situations like, so before the injector dry came out, it was pretty common that you would set up containment in kind of like a tent over the hardwood floor, and then have just your dehumidifier in there, maybe one air mover, just to get that circulation. But then you're isolating that space and really cutting it off from the ceiling that's hasn't been touched at all. So there really is, a lot of advantage to our guys using the containment, to using floor protection. I can't tell you how many homes that we've gone into where, they either had brand new flooring, or it's just something that a situation where you don't want to mess something up. We never want to mess something up in someone's home, but that's the reason why we put these things down, is so we don't get to the end of the job and we've caused more secondary damage than was caused in the first place. Yeah.
Do you guys do the remediation and the rebuild?
Yep. Yeah. So we have 2 basically full-time rebuild teams, and then we have our mitigation guys as well. So we're geared to do anything from baseboards, drywall, paint, flooring, carpeting, all the way up to larger stuff, vanities, kitchens, cabinetry. If it's a super large project, we have a couple GCs that we work with, and they're just better suited to get the job done more effectively. But for the most part, we've really built ourselves out in a way where we can do both the mitigation and the putback. It's very common for restoration companies to go in, do the mitigation, and then say, good luck. Like, have fun rebuilding your place. And so we really didn't want to put people in a position where that was the case. Wanted to give them the ability to have a one-stop shop to start and finish with the same company, so that you're not getting a bunch of things jumbled up between that transition. Because there really is quite a lot of particulars when you're dealing within folks' homes, and there's, you know, water lines and electrical lines and ducting and, you know, a lot of mechanical systems and things like that. There's variables that are different for each job that you have to factor in. So,
What are those things over there that look like they have clothes in them?
oh, rags.
It's just rags.
Yep.
They kind of look like the things that were in the metal, like whatever, like that's a little back out.
There's rags that they hate to use, so they never use, so they just sit there because it's for the period rags.
So I think some classes we'll teach in the future will be things like more about asbestos abatement, what that process looks like, and the regulations around it. Also, we'll probably do a more focused contents course as well. Are there any other classes or ideas that you guys would like to learn more about, or are there any things that people ask you about in regards to restoration that you feel like you could be more knowledgeable on?
In the smoke one, was that just fire smoke, or was that cigarettes as well? Because I've been in a few listings that reeked of cigarette smoke.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So cigarette smoke would definitely fall into like that odor category, like pet odors, marijuana odors, things of that nature. We have both solutions for folks like realtors for showing the homes, and then we also have like more long-term solutions that would completely, you know, remediate the smells. Yep.
Okay.
But yeah, that would be, I guess, considered a dry fire at that point, right? Yeah.
What if it's like a combination? Like, could you have like a combination fire?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if it started off as a protein fire, but then it got into something
Electrical or stuff like that? Yeah. Oh, 100%.
You just treat that like the worst of whatever it was.
I mean, it's to
Whatever it
Dan's
is.
point that he made. It's whatever calls for it, that's what we're going to take. That's what we're going to use.
Yep. Yeah, the whole goal in both the processes we've talked today is getting the homeowner back to a pre-loss condition, like kind, like quality materials. In other words, they're not feeling like they're suffering from going through this thing, like, you know, they used to have good, high quality stuff in their house and now they don't. At the same point, I feel like a lot of times homeowners think that their insurance policy is like a lottery ticket or something like that. Like, oh great, I finally get to like cash this sucker in today. No, that's not how it works. Like, if you have the Fiat tile, you get the Fiat tile. If you have the Lamborghini tile, you get the Lamborghini tile. But it's not like you had the Fiat tile, oh great, now I get the Lamborghini tile. It typically doesn't work that way. But it's so funny going into talk to homeowners and they're like, oh, well, I had plans of replacing that anyway. So like now I'm gonna like upgrade it. I'm like, okay, well, just so you know, insurance is gonna pay for like kind and like quality. You can upgrade, you're just gonna pay the difference between like the cost per square foot, you know? But yeah, that happens all the time. It's very common when something like this happens that folks will be like, oh, you know, I was planning on remodeling anyway, so why not at least look for the silver lining and, you know, make lemonade out of lemons or whatever expression you're looking for. That's very common. Once people get over like the initial like shock and frustration of their problem, they're like, how can I look at the bright side, you know?
Do you guys do any sort of like suicide cleanups or biohazard cleanups?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I took a class when I was first starting out. It was probably my first CE class ever. It was fascinating. It was disgusting, but it was fascinating.
Maybe we'll have to Yeah, bio and trauma class. Would that be something that is even remotely, like if we,
Sounds completely.
we'll do it tastefully, I promise, but.
Like, why would you ever do it? Like,
Yeah, we have one of our franchises up in Chicago area. She made friendships with like the 2 corners in her area, and now they send her a ton of work because that's the first person on site, and or not first person, but that's the person with the pull. But yeah, that's a common area for us to work in. We've done a couple suicide cleanups, unfortunately, but our guys typically enjoy the jobs that break up the monotony of their regular day-to-day routine, and the ones that they can view as a little bit more interesting, outside the box, something outside of their day-to-day. And so, like, there's no job too big, there's no job too messy or gross. I have so much respect for all of our technicians because of the environments that they go into and work on a day-to-day basis, and, you know, leave us at the end of the day with happy clients. That's what you want to see, is trained technicians going in, doing what's necessary and nothing more, nothing less, and leaving your clients at the end of the day with, you know, happy end results. That's our favorite, is when we got clients like bringing us by Christmas gifts or things like that, because we showed them that we cared when they needed it. So it's, it's cool to see that you've earned someone's respect, especially during like a time of need. So yeah, I hope that I was able to teach you a little bit about health and safety of your clients, and like all the steps that we take as both precautionary measures to prevent secondary damage, prevent cross-contamination, you know, just kind of speed up the process and prevent any sort of like demo when necessary. Yeah, just once again, just always make sure that you're calling out a certified restoration company, and make sure that you're taking into consideration the total time and cost of the claim. Those are all things that any, you know, reputable restoration company is going to be looking at and saying, how can I make this a better process for the clients, more streamlined? How can I provide them with more communication on the insurance process? How can I provide them with more education on their home while I'm doing the assessment? Those are all areas where a great restoration company separates themselves from a mediocre one that's just going to go in, get the job done, leave, not be personable, sometimes maybe be respectful, but you know, you just feel like you get a lot more value out of something when someone really walked you through the process when that's what you were looking for. So yeah, in my opinion, you want to call out someone that's going to be empathetic, or someone that's going to really look at your client's situation the same way they would either look at their own situation or their family members, you know. Got just a couple minutes left. Anybody have any questions or anything that they wanted to either ask about or bring up?
2 questions.
Yeah.
One, what do you do for pet odors?
For what? For pet odors? So that's a great question. So if it's like someone bought a home and the pet's no longer there, or the source has already been eliminated, they're not going to be like either peeing on the carpet anymore or things like that. We have certain things that we can use in those instances. Usually it's going to still involve pulling up the pad, right? Or pulling up carpet. Yeah.
Yeah, almost, especially with cats. I have a cat, and it's, you know, with cats, you're almost always pulling up carpet or pad. You can do everything you want. It's just not going to. You got to remove the source. At the end of the day, you have to remove the source, then you can peel the rice from there.
Yep.
And yeah, with pets, you really kind of need to get up the urine. You don't have to remove the pad, but
Yep. So we can use things like the ozone and hydroxyl as well, and also use the thermal fog. So usually we would use those in a situation where it's something we can actually get rid of and just remove completely. But any situation where it's like a porous material that's been affected by cat urine or things like that, chances are that's going to have to be removed in order to fully get the smell out. And then we also would do like a structure wipe down, or like he talked about a wet wipe down. We would do that of all like flat surfaces in the home. So all like countertops and walls and ceilings. That-
mean, every instance is different. Even like cigarette smoke, you know, say, hey, can you post a cigarette smoke? Well,
Yeah.
is it somebody that's been smoking in the house for 30 years, or is it somebody that's smoking in the house over a weekend because they had a party?
Right.
You know, it's just they're very different
Yeah, like
exercises in terms of what needs to be done.
there's a guy in my apartment complex and the maintenance keeps kind of joking about what are they going to do when he leaves, because literally like the blinds, we have like the plastic or vinyl blinds, and they're orange. Like you can look at you can look at the apartment above and it's white and it's like night and day. And so they said the baseboards are orange, the light sockets. So a situation like that, you're probably looking at demo of most of that porous material, like the drywall and whatnot. But you're talking about like your average smoker that smokes occasionally inside. We have much less aggressive techniques to use in those instances that would still totally get the job done. But yeah, I want to be cognizant of y'all's time. If I can get everyone to sign out before you leave. If you have any more questions, we're going to be sticking around. We'll be here if you need anything. And then otherwise, have a great day. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if you haven't signed this and given us your number, please do. Make sure we enter it in the system. So,
Okay. Yep. Hey, and guys, as you come out, watch your step here on the water. I'll get some rags.
Monica.
That's for fire. This is for water.
oh, there's a one. Okay, sorry.
Inside that much.
What's that?
How do you smoke inside that much?
I don't know, dude. His car smells like that too, or like, yeah.
I get it because I smoke myself. Thank you.
Ooh, that's awesome. Heck yeah. Did you see? Yeah. I saw that about halfway through. I was like, oh.
Yep. It's one of my favorites. But yeah, it's like I smoke myself quite often, you know, but